a former professor at UCD and author Gerard Casey.
Thank you very much, and again, congratulations to the organisers of this event. You're doing great work. In case you didn't know it, I'm a terrible person. And the reason I know this is my wife tells me this quite regularly. But the reason I'm a terrible person is that I'm old. I'm a Catholic. Oh my God, literally. Okay. I'm conservative. And I'm a man. Jesus, that's 4 strikes against me. Okay. In any well-regulated society, I'd be banged up for life. Okay. I've written books on free speech. I've written a book. Oh, yeah, that's too dangerous. I wrote a book on the Me Too movement, and the subtitle is, and this should give you a laugh, I hope. It says, "After Me Too," subtitle: Feminism, Patriarchy, Toxic Masculinity, okay, and Sundry Cultural Delights. Okay, that came out in 2020, so I'm 5 years ahead of the curve on that one. Tonight, I'm going to talk about another subject, and I'm not going to write a book on this one. Okay? I'm going to talk about immigration. And the reason I want to talk about this is not in relation to specific individuals. And we all know that any attempt to talk about the subject seriously is immediately you're going to be howled down with the accusation of being a racist. Okay, my plan is if ever I'm invited back onto RT again, please God, don't let that happen, right? When they come to me in the panel, I'm just going to say to the previous speaker, I think that's a bit racist. And they will say, what? And I said, oh, well, isn't everything racist? I just thought I'd get my accusation in first, right? Yeah, so it's racist. Okay, so what I want to talk about here, I'm going to encapsulate in 2 words. Numbers matter. I want you to remember, if you forget everything about the talk tonight, numbers matter. I'm not talking about individuals. So I'm not talking about being racist in the sense of treating people differently and less well because of the color of their skin or their religion or whatever it might be. I'm a fully signed up liberal on these things, liberal in the classical sense. I treat every human being as deserving respect and courtesy until they demonstrate otherwise. Okay? But I'm talking about numbers. Okay, and I want to begin by giving you a quote, and I want you to think about who said this. This was said just recently. Quote, I consider this mass migration into Europe as a threat to the daily life in Europe. Does anybody identify the speaker?
Hitler.
No, it was the Danish Prime Minister. Socialist Danish Prime Minister. Right? And she said, I agree, I disagree with J.D. Vance and America on almost everything. She's a signed-up socialist. But she said, on this point, he is right. She said, the message that our population, this is her again, the message that our population in almost all European countries has tried to send to politicians through the years, please get control of our borders and be decisive on migration. That's really a turn-up for the books. Okay, not only that a political leader in a European country will say this, but that leader is not a conservative, that leader is a socialist. The new German government that's being formed is already indicated that it's going to be, it hasn't laid out the details, it's going to be tightening its policy on migration. Just how that will work in Germany is anybody's guess, probably awfully, but there we are, we shall see as the time comes. Okay, so numbers matter. I'm not going to deal, by the way, with the economic issues of migration. It's self-evident, it's costing us a small fortune for what I don't know. It's absolutely insane. Okay, I don't think we need to demonstrate this. Anybody whose mind hasn't been corrupted already will know this, and so on. So I'm just going to leave that to one side. It's as I said, it's an emotionally charged topic. Loud voices, however, and name-calling are no substitute for rational discussion. Now, I put up on my Twitter, or whatever they call it these days, X, a flowchart for how you might have a conversation about this. And I said, Here's the question: do you allow or permit, or are you in favour of immigrants to your country? Yes or no? If no, say why. If yes, go to the next question. The next question is: should the number of immigrants be unlimited or limited? Again, if unlimited, tell me why. If limited, tell me by what criterion? Not more than a fixed proportion of the native population? By race or ethnicity? Can't talk about that these days, but I'm talking about it. See, I'm going to die soon. I don't care. I really don't care. Right? It's great to be old. Nationality, sex, cultural proximity, okay, or possession of required skills. All of these things could lead to something that begins to resemble a rational conversation. But no, you cannot say anything without being shouted at. All right. Here are 2 paragraphs from somebody I know, Frank Furedi. He's a professor of sociology. He's Hungarian background, but he lived in England most of his life. And he says the following: dependence on mass migration to solve Europe's economic malaise is bad enough. What's even worse, this is really what I want to talk about tonight, is the strategy of using immigration to transform Europe's social and cultural landscape. In recent decades, Europe's cultural elites have promoted the claim that a culturally successful society is one where multiculturalism and the celebration of immigration prevails. From this standpoint, a heterogeneous society of different groups of migrants trumps one devoted to its national culture. For the EU's technocratic managed elite, mass migration serves to undermine national consciousness, and therefore, hence it says, national identities, culture, all these prevent the emergence of a supranational amorphous empire. Because that's the plan. Okay? All of these things, families get in the way, cultures get in the way, history gets in the way, nationality gets in the way. All of these must go. Right? Numbers matter. Now, here's the point I want to make. History is to a nation what memory is to an individual. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but there are people who suffer from conditions in which they have severe memory loss amounting to something like anything that is longer than 5 seconds, they can't remember. So when they're in hospital and the wife comes to visit, they say, "Hi, darling, lovely to see you." He turns around to look out the window and he turns around and says, "Oh, darling, it's lovely to see you." When your memory goes in that radical way, your personality has disintegrated. You have ceased to be the person that you were. A nation is a group of people. It comes from the Latin word natus. It means people who are born together, who have grown up together, who come from people who have been born together and grown up together back through the ages. And the history of a nation is the memory. In other words, what makes a nation to be a nation is not just the people who are alive now. It's the memory of those people who were your progenitors, their sufferings, their agonies, their work. It's really important. Just as somebody else's memories are not constitutive of your personality. They may be more interesting, okay, but they're not yours. It has to be your memories that make your personality. It has to be our history as a nation, and it's the history of our people. Okay? That's what makes us to be a nation. That's what makes us to be Irish. It's not that there's something wrong with not being Irish. There's no pathology affected in that. It's just that we are creatures. We are bodily creatures. We are not disembodied consciousnesses. We have a history, we have a nation, we have a culture, we have friends, we have family. All of these things make us who we are. We are literally a sort of a point, a nexus of relationships to all of these things. These are the things that make us to be what we are. Take those things away, okay, and you have isolated individuals. That's what happens. They've tried to destroy the family. They've done a pretty good job. Okay, you destroy the family, you've got isolated individuals, and the state finds it very easy to control isolated individuals. That's why the family has always been the first target of every revolutionary movement. Get rid of the family, whether it's in Russia, wherever it might be. And now they want to get rid of the nation. And by the way, I'm not a recidivist nationalist. Okay, in other words, my wife said to me today, "You know something, you're half English." I told you she thinks I'm a horrible person, right? And she's right. My mother was English, okay? And she said that accounts for a lot of your personality, okay? And she may be right. But on my father's side, it's Irish all the way back. These are people who are alive in the 1911 census. There were people who were alive in 1856. These are people who are buried in Castletown Cemetery in Dundalk. Those are my people. Their history is my history. What they went through in the famine or what they went through in the 18th century under the penal laws, that's my history. That's what makes me to be Irish. That's what it means to be Irish. You don't get to be Irish simply by going through a naturalization ceremony and saying, I'm the new Irish. You're not the new Irish. I'm sorry, I don't mean any disrespect, but you're not the new Irish. Any more than if I went to China and became a naturalized Chinese citizen, I would be Chinese, right? Or India. Nobody else does this nonsense, right? Not the new Irish. And by the way, it's not only a question of nationalities. I mean, if I'm from Cork, well, that's where I was born anyway. It's not quite the same thing. If I went to live in Kerry for 40 years, I'd still be a blow-in. In other words, we have sub-regional variations where I cannot become a Kerryman by living most of my life in Kerry. You cannot become Irish by living most of your life in Ireland. Right? It's very important. This is important. Numbers matter. You lose your memory, you lose your personality, lose your history, lose your nation. Now, the question here then is, when I say numbers matter, I don't mean that people who are not Irish can't come and live here. Of course they can. The question is, how many? That's why numbers matter. Okay? And it's like absorbing food. I mean, we take in food every day. If you do nothing but eat all day, it's not going to be good for you. You overwhelm your system. You cannot absorb that amount of food. No nation can preserve its nationality or its national identity if it takes in a significant number. I don't know what that number is, but when it starts reaching 24 or 25% and moving upwards, I start to get worried. This is not a colony of China. This is not a colony of India. This is not a colony of Nigeria. Okay? Dublin City is not part of Mumbai. Dublin City is not part of Lagos. Right? It just isn't. It's not part of Beijing. And when the numbers reach a certain level, the culture starts to shift. Now, here's the question. They talk about multiculturalism. There is no such a thing as multiculturalism, unless you talk about it in the most trivial of senses. In any society, in any functioning society, at any one time, there is only one culture, by which I mean the rule of law, the way in which people relate to one another, the unspoken norms that constitute a society. If another society, if another group of people comes in sufficiently large number, they either assimilate slowly, but then it requires that it not be a very large number, or they set up a parallel structure. And that's not a good idea. Right now, Stephen Fry got into trouble for saying that he didn't think London was an English city anymore. And you wonder why he said that. Well, the reason is very simple. Only 43% of the people who live in London are white. It's not what I would think of as an English city. Birmingham is slightly better. 49% of the people who live in Birmingham are white. I had my own experience there. I was teaching at an institution in Birmingham, outside in the suburbs. And I came into the city centre to do some totally unnecessary CD purchasing. And so I went into HMV on whatever street it was on, and I bought some CDs. And as I came out, I was sort of standing there wondering where to go, not really knowing. I looked down the street and suddenly realised I was the only non-Indian, or sense, person on that street. This is the second biggest city in the UK. That's a shock. All right. Now, here's a thought experiment. Imagine that every inhabitant of Ireland was abducted by aliens. There are people who think that's happened already, by the way, and replaced by exactly the same number of Indians or Chinese. Would they be the new Irish? And the answer is no. They would be expatriate Indians or Chinese living in Ireland. Okay. Now, in a piece for the National Review entitled "The West Suicide Wish," Madeleine Curran's remarks, in pursuing the ideal of multiculturalism, according to which opposing cultures can coexist happily without the need for a unifying narrative and patriotic commitment, we have allowed mass immigration from anti-Western cultures without prioritizing those immigrants' assimilation or integration. She asks, is it really Islamophobia to prefer our Judeo-Christian tradition, our constitution and our rule of law to the mores of the Arab world, to which my answer is absolutely bloody hell not, right? The freedoms and liberties, this is her again, the West provides can easily be taken for granted. It has taken centuries of struggle. This is what I mean by our history being constitutive of who we are, and reform to get where we are. It may not be perfect. There are many things to be ashamed about. Still, there is nowhere better to be than in a society in which fundamental freedoms, including those of speech, assembly, and religion, are valued and protected. And that's especially true if you happen to be gay, a woman, or a member of a religious minority. So one image I want to leave you with. Remember, numbers matter. I'm going to repeat that as my mantra. And here's my other thing. Beware the rabbits. You're going, what the hell? He's finally losing it. This always reminds me of that Monty Python thing where they have the killer rabbit. Remember that one? Okay, anyway. Think of culture along ecological lines. If you have a flourishing ecological flora and fauna, and you introduce a new animal or a new species from outside that, a number of things can happen. One, it can fit easily into it and be adapted. But the other thing that can happen is it can get completely out of control and start to take over the fauna and to squeeze out the existing animals and plants that exist. This is a problem. Now, existing cultures have developed over time and are in a state of dynamic equilibrium. If a new animal or plant, and you know what I'm talking about here, is introduced from outside the ecological area, it upsets the equilibrium, which may be capable of being re-established or not. But sometimes the new animal or plant becomes an ineradicable pest, requiring constant monitoring and control. And that is not conducive for a flourishing society, let me tell you. All right? Anyway, moving on. There's much more to say, but I ain't going to say it. I just want to remind you again that numbers matter. And just to finish, by the way, I just want to say, my future is behind me. Okay, yours is in front. I will be dead in a maximum of 15 years. Thank God. All right? I just couldn't bear the possibility of having to continue to live in this God-forsaken mess. Okay. Don't tell me how wonderful things are now. I was just remarking to Cormac Lucy at the start here. I mean, there have been improvements. There are many, many improvements. I grew up in Cork in the 1950s and 60s, and my God, everything was in black and white. Okay, I was convinced that the world was in black and white. Okay, the only colour you got was in the cinema on a Saturday afternoon when you saw swashbuckling pirates and so on. And then you came out into Cork rain at 5:30 in the afternoon. My God, it was miserable. Okay, so there are many, many things that have improved. Okay, I'm not O'Coning about it. I'm not saying everything was perfect in the past. There have been many, many improvements, but we have really serious challenges. And all I agree with everything Cormac said. Okay, everything that Sarah said. Okay, all of these things are correct. There are challenges that face you. They don't face me. I'm retired. Okay? Why the hell am I doing this if I'm retired? But anyway, my wife wants to know that too. But the future lies before you. Nobody knows what will turn up. Nobody knows when and if a crisis will happen. And I would say one other thing. Not only do numbers matter, but this is going to sound really strange. Money isn't wealth. Okay? Is that sorry, what do you mean? Wealth are things like buildings and streets and buses and cars and railways and factories making things. That's wealth. Ireland may be a rich country in terms of having money in its pocket, right? But we are not a wealthy country. And it will not take much, let me tell you. Okay, maybe just Trump, by the way, okay, of whom I'm a fan, okay, it won't take much, okay, to upset the apple cart and to make us not only not a wealthy country, which we are not anyway, but still less of a rich country, which we may be temporarily. Numbers matter.